Hey, everybody, Patrick Gunner here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. And it should be pretty obvious why we're here this week. It should be pretty obvious to every boxing fan, but man, we're here to preview Saúl Canelo Álvarez versus Caleb Plant. And I'm here with my dude, Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, fine t-shirt, boxing history t-shirt purveyor. What's up, man? How you doing?
What's going on, my dude? We got a big fight ahead of us this week, you know what I mean? And undisputed super middleweight championship for the first time. Álvarez playing. It's a big fight. It's a grudge match, and a lot of people are excited about it, man. It's been building for a long time, and a lot of politics involved. That people thought the fight wasn't going to get made for a while because of it, but here we are.
Yeah, man. Like there was it was a bit of an excursion getting to this fight and getting it made, making sure everything went
In
down.
the grand scheme of things, is like, besides this being for the undisputed championship of unification, stuff like that, like just the matchup in itself wouldn't get like anyone salivating back in the day. The only reason why anyone got really hyped about this fight is because of what's on the line for it. Now, so
Well, I mean, it kind of does open up a little bit of a wider discussion. I don't want to like take it too wide because we got to preview the fight, but it does kind of open up a wider discussion because of the fact that there's been an insistence for a number of years, and I'm not going to argue with it much, that alphabet titles don't mean that much or shouldn't mean that much. We shouldn't pay very much attention to them. And again, I'm not going to argue with that. Like overall, I would generally agree. But this being a unification or for the undisputed super middleweight championship, however you want to, word it really, it does kind of add a little extra oomph to the matchup. The fact that what's on the line is super middleweight supremacy, basically. So, I mean, that does kind of open up a bit of a wider discussion. But the fight itself, like you said, it's not like blockbuster per se, but it's a pretty solid matchup, I would say, especially given, there's not really many places for Canelo Alvarez to go at this point, given his development. So I think it's probably the proper matchup at the right time.
I'd agree with that. Plant is undefeated. He is the IBF super middleweight champion. He has a lot of build toward him. People have been hyped about him for a while, and he's put on solid performances. He hasn't struggled in any of his fights yet. So he looks the part, and with the way he fights and his style and stuff like that, a lot of people think he can give Alvarez fits. I'm not sure yet, man. I guess that's why they fight the fights, but he does have a very slick style. He's knows how to box well. Very confident in the ring. He's very confident for this fight, and he's been asking for it for a while. Alvarez, going up because he wants to make history and become the first super middleweight champion that's completely undisputed with all the belts. He's trying to make history in itself. And then, so he already had that on the line, and both guys were already motivated at that point. Plant because he feels that he's the major underdog in this fight, and that it was almost at first when it was made, it was just because it was going to be Alvarez's coronation, and people were almost just forgetting about him, overlooking him, so to speak. And it's become so much more than that now because of the bad blood that's developed between these two.
Yeah, dude, that press conference scuffle seemed to give it a little bit of oomph. We did a show.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy, man. Plant has definitely gotten under Alvarez's skin, unlike apparently any other fighter has been able to, including Billy Joe Saunders, which is pretty incredible in itself. And Plant, he's been a lot of allegations going around saying that Canelo was dirty. He's been taking steroid, PEDs and other stuff of the like because he popped one time and all these other things. He's making allegations against his whole team. It's gotten pretty bad. Canelo is a very proud fighter who takes these types of comments and allegations seriously and gets pissed off about it. And, it boiled over. And then when it got to that press conference, which everybody's seen, obviously, with, what was it, Plant said motherfucker, and then Alvarez took that literally, I guess, to think that was about his mom or something, and all hell broke loose right after it. But Alvarez said afterwards, too, when, he landed that two-piece slap to counter Caleb's one and subsequently cut his face a little bit, he said, you know, this is the most pissed I've ever been in a fight. He's like, I've never felt this way about an opponent before. I want to hurt him so badly. And it seemed real. It wasn't seem like he was just trying to build this up for the cameras or trying to anything. At that moment in time when he said that, those were his real feelings. So it's built it even more so now. And the fact that it's such a grudge fight now, I think has gotten people really excited to see what could potentially happen this Saturday.
The motherfucker thing's pretty funny, especially because
It's hilarious.
especially
because Alvarez uses the word all the time too. So
he does. He does. And not only that, like I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago, I might have been before the Floyd fight. I don't remember what fight it was before, but they were doing one of those all access or 24/7, whatever type of things. And one of the big kind of narratives ahead of the fight was how close he was with his mom. And he's really, they haven't really covered that much in recent years. Perhaps it's like, they stay private, or I don't know, man. I don't know. But he's a little bit more tabloid status in Mexico than he is in the US. So they might hear more about his mom, for instance, in Mexico than here. But yeah, dude, it's pretty fucking funny because I don't know if he was intentionally translating it incorrectly or what the deal was, but is a little bit rich. But I will say
it's funny because like his last scuffle that he had at a press conference, he was calling Boo Boo at him, dropping an MF on Boo Boo.
Yeah, exactly. So but I was gonna say, when it comes to the allegations about being a PED user, I just gotta say, get the fuck out of here. Yeah. Get the fuck out of here. Canelo style. Get the fuck out of here, bro. No, it's it's a little bit ridiculous, but dude,
it does present an interesting fight though, because a lot of people do think that Plant has the style to give Canelo fits, which has been said before for many opponents.
That's true. Well, I do think that there is something to it though, because I mean, just looking back, all we can really go back on is what we've seen from each fighter. And that's a little bit of the problem that I'm seeing from a lot of the contingent that's picking Caleb Plant, is that it's kind of like, well, a lot of the argument seems to be based on what they feel he can probably do, not so much what he's done, because I mean, there's not really any high level fighters that he's defeated that we've been able to like look at that performance and say, yeah, he's obviously world class. I mean, he's toward the top of a division that has been kind of thinned out a little bit, but it's I don't know. I don't want to downplay him too much.
Exactly. He hasn't really been tested yet, and even though he's a champion, he's one of those champions that just,
right.
He's been untested as a pro, and if this was another era, he'd still be like a top contender, or like contender still building himself. He wouldn't have it yet.
There's always that argument too, that like every fighter starts somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like every fighter at some point hasn't beaten somebody, and that's fair. Like, he just might be a future great fighter who, as of yet, has not defeated anybody. And perhaps Canelo Alvarez is the first step in establishing that very much might well be the case. I don't think it is, though, because as I said, we can really only go off what we've seen from each fighter. And from what we've seen from each fighter, from Canelo, for instance, like what are a handful of opponents that have given him trouble, right? Erislandy Lara, Austin Trout, Floyd Mayweather, that kind of style that's very counterpunchy. What's that?
Saunders maybe once or twice, a couple of times in the fight.
Yeah, a little bit. And actually, even Kovalev earlier on in that fight, he was having a lot of trouble with his jab, getting past his jab. And so, there are like a handful of things that pretty much all of these fighters did, though. All of them jabbed very well. And all of them used a counter-punching style against a guy who's a natural counter-puncher. And so I think that just based on that, Canelo, like, he doesn't really want to lead if he doesn't have to. He'd rather be the counter-puncher. That's his natural instinct. And so I think against other counter-punchers, it takes him a little bit. Like, he winds up having to catch up. Billy Joe Saunders, too, natural counter-puncher. That's kind of what winds up happening when you put two counter-punchers in against one another. Is that it often winds up being a flinchy fight, kind of a reactionary type of fight. And so that right there in itself kind of gives Caleb Plant an opening. He's got the height advantage. He's got the reach advantage. If he can really get in there with his jab, I think he could probably cause Canelo some problems. Here's the kind of
early on he might too, as Canelo has to get adjusted to what he's doing.
I agree. And I think the rub on that, though, the rub on Canelo having issues with that style is that in the last 3 to 4 years, maybe a little bit more, he's clearly gotten better. He has clearly evolved. He's clearly um, gotten to a point where he can use slightly different styles. And he's not just a counterpuncher. He was able to lead against Golovkin quite successfully in the rematch, in my opinion. I thought he won the fight. I thought Golovkin won the first fight, Canelo won the second fight. But he was able to lead very well against Golovkin, against a guy who's very difficult to do that against. And he was able to obviously overcome Kovalev, who is just a beast despite his outside the ring problems, and proved he was a beast early on in the fight. So I think that there are a number of things you can look at here and be like, all right, you can't go against Canelo too hard here. It's just a lack of information with Caleb Plant, though. Like we haven't seen him against enough of those
Exactly.
at top level.
And even after he's won the title against you know what I'm trying to say.
Uzcategui, yeah.
Yeah, it was Uzcategui. He wasn't even really
It's not the
tested.
easiest name. I'll give you that. It's not the easiest name.
The guy who just got popped. There you go.
Yeah.
But he wasn't really testing that fight. And then his subsequent title defenses against you know, the opposition that he's had since then, he hasn't been tested in those fights either. And it's kind of like, I don't even think he's lost a round in any of his title defenses since then. And he's almost been like in cruise control, because, you know, the knock on him has always been, oh, he's just doing the same thing over and over. He never really has to push himself or really step up his gas, because he's not, the opponents weren't able to do anything with him to make him do anything like that. You know, right. He was content to go the distance and have a 12-round round if necessary, or if he could finish a guy off, he would do it. But he was never, you know, he hasn't been pushing that level yet. We're not sure what's going to happen, because Alvarez is obviously seasoned at that level. Alvarez has been at the high level and been fighting it this way for a while, and now he's in his actual prime, even though he's coming up on his 60th pro fight, which is crazy. But Alvarez is at the peak of his powers. Like you mentioned, he has so many layers to his game now. He knows different aspects. He's fit, you know, he's matured way beyond the Mayweather fight when he was befuddled back then. And he knows answers to questions and produces traps and sets things up and all that. There's all kinds of aspects to him now. And as good as Plant has looked, there's no denying his skill. We're not sure how that's going to translate on the big stage like this, at least in my opinion.
I agree. No, I totally agree. Like I said, it's kind of like basing the argument that he's going to win on what you think he has the ability to do, and not necessarily what we've seen him do. I mean, you got to give him, I guess. He defeated Mike Lee, so technically he's probably the Subway super middleweight champion. Shouldn't he be a Subway spokesman? Maybe not. Subway's toxic now, but regardless, you know, it's not the deepest division. It honestly is not the deepest division. And you know what?
No, definitely not.
Historically, it has not been the deepest division either. There's only been kind of short or brief eras in time where there have been, you know, a stacked super middleweight division, or there have been enough fighters at the top where it could make for a fun round robin or type of situation, or that they've been handled by the same promoters.
Super middleweight, and it took a number of years for super middleweight to get the recognition that, you know, as like a legit division, and people to actually acknowledge it, and so on and so forth. It took a lot of like spectacular names too at that point in the mid 90s to really bring prominence to it, where people were just like, hell yeah, you know, super middleweights are where it's at the moment, and to get excited for potential fights, because it wasn't always like that, especially in the very beginning of the era, kind of like the cruiserweights. But again, super middleweight, in my opinion, was a necessary division if you look at the grand scheme of things, because middleweights had to go to light heavyweight if they were going to jump in division, and that's 160 all the way to 175, which, you know, it's a major gap in a.
It's already gap. Yeah, already even from 168 to 75 is a pretty big jump. You know, there's no question.
But when Ward moved up to fight Kovalev, he looked naturally like the smaller guy. It didn't look like a natural light heavyweight. You know what I mean? Natural light heavyweights are guys like Bob Foster, who were small against heavyweights. Bob Foster was a big-ass dude in itself, maybe a little bit bigger than a normal-sized light heavyweight, but you get what I'm saying here. Like, going from 160 all the way to 175 was a huge leap. And then so to have the super middleweight division put in there, that was like kind of necessary. But at the same time, the early champions of the division from back then, I mean, it wasn't screaming out like what people were saying, oh, I need to see these guys fight, because look at the first names that you had. You know, you had Murray Sutherland, Chong Pal Park, Fulgencio Oblagemas, who was best known for getting blasted by Marvin Hagler twice, Lyndell Holmes, Christoph Tioso, you know, names like that. And all good fighters, don't get me wrong. They're not like, you know, they were bad or anything in the like. They were all very solid. But they weren't like elite level guys, you know, in the grand scheme of things. Not one of them. So the division took a while. And when I don't even consider Sugar Ray Leonard a part of that division either, because when he fought Donnie Lalonde, that was just that weird thing where they put dual titles together and he didn't even spend time in there afterwards, really. Like, I think he fought Thomas Hearns soon after that, and then that was it. You know, Leonard was done. So he only made a quick pit stop there. It didn't really count. Thomas Hearns, kind of the same thing. These guys weren't taking it. No one was really taking it seriously. It didn't start getting prominence and didn't start getting like the attention until I would say early to mid 90s, and the European scene started coming on with guys like obviously Nigel Benn, moving up from middleweight, Chris Eubank, Steve Collins came into the mix, and also on the American side, Frankie Lyles, Iran Barkley, James Toney when he eventually moved up, and then a guy named Roy Jones who brought a lot of, you know, attention.
Yeah, dude. Even now, it's still often thought of as kind of like a European or European-based division. It's had a lot of like strong ties to the WBO, which itself has often been considered kind of like a European organization, or an organization that's just friendly to European market or whatever. I don't know why precisely. I'm honestly not really sure, but it does kind of bear out historically. But either way,
you're absolutely right. From in the early 90s, before Roy and James, you know, before James Toney moved up and that Roy really came on the scene, it was the division was really dominated out in Europe. And then as the mid 90s came around, and then Roy moved up, James Toney, you know, went on his own way. Everybody sort of retired. Steve Collins promptly retired. Chris Eubank retired before he came back briefly. Nigel Benn retired. Joe Kawasaki was the man. And then Sven Otke also became champion at that point, which was, you know, Robin Reed in the mix, Jigga Boy Malinga, Richie Woodhull. These were all guys in the UK. You know, it's not like they weren't featured on television. Showtime, notably, usually would put on super middleweight title fights. But again, after Roy Jones then moved up, it became kind of like, you know, a European division, like the division that was popular over in Europe for a while. And then slowly, again, in the 2000s, when Jeff Lacey came on, Jeff Lacey came into the scene. And then later on, as you mentioned, Andre Ward and others, stuff like that, that's when it started gaining more traction again and so on.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because between Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns, there was that kind of like, it was a bit of a rivalry and kind of a race to see who can get the most titles and the most divisions quickest or whatever, or who could get the most legit titles. Or I mean, you know, whatever. I guess looking back, it doesn't really matter. They were both really great. But it right around the same time as that Donnie Lalonde fight, which they had that novelty dual title whatever on the line with that stupid ass WBC. But then right around the same time, Tommy Hearns winds up picking up the WBO because they probably saw, right? What's that?
Who did he fight for that? It was a vacant title fight.
It was. I can't even remember who he fought for the vacant title, but I'd have to look, to be honest. I just remember that they saw the opportunity, the WBO, that is. Like, oh, Thomas Hearns wants to fight for our title? Well, then let's go ahead and make a super middleweight. I guess we might as well. So, I mean, I get it. I'm not saying I like it, but I get it. But yeah, that's kind of how the WBO got their foot into the super middleweight picture. But it was still a few years before the WBO would kind of become more legitimate, I guess, in the eyes of the boxing public and fans and stuff, largely because of I would say everything going on at heavyweight and the heavyweight title picture being kind of muddy, but then the WBO being with a couple of somewhat popular fighters and stuff like that, and probably helped also the light heavyweight situation with Darius Mikulchevsky and all that type of stuff.
I
But
was
all
gonna
that's in
say
the
they had
90s.
long reigning champions at light heavyweight and super middleweight with Mikulchevsky, and then at light heavyweight with
Svenotki, yeah.
Mikulchevsky, and then yep, and then at super middleweight with well, Locky was IBF, but
Well, yeah, that's true. He was IBF, but
yeah,
long
but like
reign
at super
anyway. Yeah,
middleweight, Eubank was champion for a long time before he was upset by Steve Collins, and then
yeah,
Calzaghe obviously took it to another level after that too.
yeah. That round robin between that. Well, I think that a lot of boxing fans from the UK who are probably like slightly older than us, like we're in our late 30s. A lot of fans who are like a little bit older than us probably have really fond memories in the UK of that rivalry. Well, and outside of the UK with Collins, of that rivalry between Nigel Benn, Eubank, Collins, and Watson, and
Well,
like basically the round robin. That probably also really helped popularize the WBO and the super middleweight division. Just that
it was
little
popular in
grouping.
Europe, and then it got attention over here too. Probably not for the best reasons, but obviously, unfortunate reasons. That was when Joe McClellan moved up to fight Nigel
Yeah,
Benn, and
yeah,
obviously that was an incredible fight, man. And it's so tragic what happened to, because that
yeah.
was not thinking about the tragedy aside. That was, you know, ebb and flow back and forth. That thing was like a movie in itself. It was wild, and
It's one of those things that's kind of like it's become taboo to enjoy, which I totally get. But like for instance, Mancini Kim, dude, I'm not saying I watch it a lot, but every so often, like every handful of years or something like that, I'll watch it, and it's a really incredible fight. Like it just
hell of a fight.
terrific. But obviously knowing how it ends up, it's tough. And that's kind of one of those situations where look, we're not going to get into the grim whatever, but sometimes it's tough like watching those kinds of fights and knowing what's up. But
Dude, I passed up on a Mancini
I hope
Kim.
you passed up on a Mankini, bro.
Well, that's better. Mancini Kim sweatshirt that I saw on eBay, because I just thought that was a little too morbid for me.
Oh man, like I mean, on one hand, yeah, great like memorabilia that probably like almost nobody is gonna have, or if they do, they're not gonna like display it or something. But yeah, that's a tough one. But circling back to this super middleweight business in the 90s was really when it blew up. And I think that also stateside, what really, really helped it obviously was that Roy Jones versus James Toney matchup, which was pretty big here. James Toney was already through middleweight and then gone to super middleweight. His weight troubles were pretty well noted by that time. But Roy Jones, we've already mentioned not that the division has been around super long, but we've already mentioned the greatest fighters in the division: Roy Jones, Joe Calzaghe. Those two right there are probably the consensus top two. After that, it gets a little bit muddy because it's like, you see the dominance or the quote unquote dominance of Svenotki, but like once you start looking through his record,
Don't even get me started on that.
it's rough,
man.
dude. It's rough.
Not a
So
fan. Not a
there's
fan.
beyond like the top like three, it's a scrum. There's a lot of arguing to do, but it's a pretty cool division and probably an underrated division, really.
No, it absolutely, man. They've had some incredible fights in that division and some very solid champions who have passed through. Not just the aforementioned names, but there's been other guys as well. I mean, Frankie Lyles, for instance, was a very respectable champion in the mid '90s.
Your guy, the Hatchet.
Yes, I love Charles Burrow, one of my all-time favorite fighters, me and my dad. Michael Nunn was in the division for a cup of coffee. One of the biggest upsets of the '90s, if not in boxing, at the past 50 years, is when journeyman Steve Little, tough guy who didn't have the best record, but always gave a good account of himself and always went the distance with everybody. Upset Michael Nunn in a major upset for the super middleweight title. And like I mentioned too, dude, you had a lot of just really tough contenders around that era as well. Tony Thornton, Murky Sosa, Thomas Tate. The list goes on and on of these guys who always made really good fights, whether in their title fights or not. and it was a lot of fun. You know, I loved watching the super middleweights in the mid '90s on whether it was Showtime, HBO, or Tuesday Night Fights. And I'll mention one other thing too. When Roy Jones was dominating that division, it was almost interesting to watch now as an adult, I think back on it, to see the two dynamics that you had. On Showtime, they always, for the most part, had competitive fights for the super middleweight division, unless there was like a showcase Frankie Lyles fight. But like, you would usually get fights like Ben McClellan, like I mentioned, or Steve Collins in a title fight, or Frankie Lyles fighting Steve Little. When Roy Jones would fight on HBO, it was usually Roy Jones against Antoine Bird, Roy Jones against Tony Thornton, tough guy, but just had no chance against in hell against Roy. Roy Jones against Brian Brandon. They're all showcase fights. And both sides would bicker back and forth about they wanted to fight each other. You know, at one point, Ben and I remember on the radio, I actually heard it. I was a little kid, and this was back when they still talked boxing on the radio. But whatever station I was listening to, they said, we have breaking news. Roy Jones is going to fight England's Nigel Benn. And I started freaking out because I was like, oh my God, they're going to fight. You know, I just knew who both were, and I was really hyped. And then Roy fought Vinny Paz instead.
So, I think that's been one of the bigger criticisms of Roy Jones, that obviously he's had the talent and the showmanship and all that type of stuff, but throughout much of his career, he didn't really fight very many punchers, and there were punchers available for him to fight at various times. Now, granted, it's kind of one of those situations where a number of these other fighters kind of beat the shit out of each other, so that they never even really got to Roy Jones, or they fucked up. You know, I mean, you can't really blame Roy Jones for the fact that James Toney couldn't keep his weight down. And I mean, granted, he was like playing football in high school at like 220 pounds or some shit like that. So I don't know that he ever really had much business making 160, 168. But point is, you can't blame Roy Jones for that. But yeah, dude, it's never really been a super heavy, top heavy division, or a really deep division, I guess you could say. And I guess now is not really much of a change in that regard. But I mean, I guess who else would be out there to fight at super middleweight? So either guy, whoever wins this fight between Canelo and Plant, are probably going to be looking toward other money opportunities. Or I guess if it's Caleb Plant, they're probably going to have a rematch. That's probably the reality there. But even so, let's assume Canelo were to win. I mean, there's not really anywhere for him to go in terms of super middleweight. I mean, not that I can think of anyway. So the plan was already, before they linked up Canelo and Plant, to try for I think it was Dimitri Bivol, I think, that they were initially trying to go for Canelo. But in any case, yeah, man, it's not a deep division now. It's never been a deep division, but it is significant that these two guys are linking up for all the marbles.
Dude, I'm not sure. You know, like you mentioned, if Plant wins, then obviously there's going to be a rematch involved. That's it. That's the first things first. And going from there, I'm sure they'd mix and match him with whoever's available in the PPC realm. You know, there's big fights to be made in that, whether it's moving up or moving down, or someone moving up to fight him. There'd be fights to be made over there. As far as Canelo goes, I think his business is he just wants to absolutely wipe out super middleweight. And once he's achieved that goal, I can't see him hanging around trying to make mandatory defenses or trying to keep the belts on the line and stuff like that. Like he's already there, you know, at that point. Yeah, light heavyweight might be the next phase again if he moves up there, and because he's been there already, he knocked out Kovalev. Like you mentioned, Bivol might be the next option. That'd be a very, very, very interesting fight for various reasons, and one I think Canelo probably would be interested in, considering he almost had it. You know, he was about to pick him right before every Plant came back into the picture. So, yeah, that might be his next option, is moving up to light heavyweight and finding his next challenge.
Another thing that I think that we got to give it up to Canelo for a little bit is the fact that he said that he was going to be busier, that he was going to pick up the pace a bit, and he has, dude. He will have fought 3 times this year, and for an absolute upper echelon fighter, like that doesn't really happen very often, and which is kind of
it's
sad.
definitely
And
horrible.
it's its own sad commentary. But in fact, dude, if everything had gone according to schedule, he might have fought 4 times this year. So that's, I mean, it sucks and it's kind of stupid that that's even amazing, but it is kind of amazing, and it's pretty cool
I
to
mean,
have
for this
somebody.
era, it really is, and for a guy of his stature, and how
Exactly, yeah,
almost every fight, people think for a fighter of this level, everything has to be a huge event. That is really big. It's pretty awesome,
yeah,
and
it is.
it's unheard of now for a guy of his level to step down and fight someone of like the level of like a Yildirim. You know what I mean? Or like a stay busy fight. But Canelo has no problems doing that and just, showing that, hey, staying active is the best thing you can do, not just fighting once or twice a year, making an event and then taking off.
Well, and that is one thing that
For
he's
longevity,
also,
it's good. Yeah, it's good not to be rusty. It's good for so many various reasons.
well, and that's one thing that he's also got going for him, is that he has more recent rounds under his belt going into this fight. I would imagine that he's just going to be a little bit sharper, because maybe that's why he got the slap in on that the press
Yeah.
conference, because he had the recent rounds. He's a little sharper. Um, Something that you brought up earlier, and like I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. I do want to say it because it has been a part of the not only Caleb Plant's claims and at the press conferences and shit like that, but also a lot of people on social media parrot a lot of the things that wind up getting said. So the whole PED thing, man. So I know I'm taking like a deep breath. I don't, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do have some shit to say on it. So back when Canelo he wound up testing positive for clenbuterol. I said it on social media at the time, but I was relatively familiar with clenbuterol, at least in a textbook manner, because of my veterinary experience and shit like that, because it's primarily an equine drug. You don't really see it used very often in dogs and cats, but you definitely see it used with horses. So I was a little bit familiar with it, and I was a little bit familiar with having to research because of my veterinary background. There's a lot of crossover when it comes to food animals, when the veterinary field and the human medicine field, there's a lot of overlap when it comes to food animals. So, like, do I, for instance, believe that Canelo tested positive for clenbuterol, like a significant amount of clenbuterol, because he ate tainted beef? Probably not. I would sooner believe that he was taking some sort of supplements, and the supplements got tainted than the beef got tainted. That seems really unlikely to me, that it wouldn't get metabolized. But whatever, dude, fine. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just go ahead and say he ate beef, whatever the case was, he had clenbuterol in his system. That pretty much cannot be disputed. But apart from the whole clenbuterol thing, we have like a little bit of, okay, I don't want to say apart from the whole clenbuterol thing as if I am sweeping that under the rug, because it is significant. And I think that it is significant given the PED use that we often see in boxing, or the suspected PED usage among fighters, which is probably fairly high, and a lot higher than a lot of people realize. So it shouldn't be swept under the rug. It shouldn't be overlooked. But it's also not really quite a damning case if we're looking at this as, the motherfucking hashtag levels here. If we're looking at the kind of scale of PED positives, it's not really that damning of a PED positive, and he hasn't tested positive since, which is, obviously a pretty good thing. So on the flip side of that, though, and something that I brought up on social media, is that you have Caleb Plant, who is sponsored by Victor Conti's supplement company, SNAC. And I know that I brought this up on a recent show, so I don't want to drone on about it. But dude, Victor Conti, Balco, late 90s, early 2000s, really helped
Power of
facilitate.
power.
I mean, dude, yeah, former Tower Power bassist fucking guy. And then he helped facilitate a widespread performance enhancing drug like industry within baseball, but also in track and field in the late 90s and early 2000s. And this fool was sentenced to, like, I don't even remember what it was, some ridiculous amount of jail time, did like 5 months and got out mysteriously. And now has, since getting out, professed that he just wants to clean up boxing. Why? Nobody knows. It's just magical, mystical, and wonderful, fantastical, and totally fucking made up. And so now he has a quote unquote supplement company. The supplement industry is a notoriously like unregulated industry, to the point where it's like, dude, you can basically just claim you have whatever the hell in some capsule in a bottle. Like it's laughably unregulated. So that in itself is a problem. And the fact that you have this former PED fucking kingpin heading up this company, and then not only heading up this company, but using the money made on this company to sponsor fighters. Like, I don't see how that's not problematic. And it also seems to me, at least from a moral or ethical standpoint, it definitely cancels out Caleb Plant's claims that there's something funky going on or bad, or, he's a drug cheat and that type of shit. So what does that mean? Is it like, two wrongs make a right? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's hypocritical. It doesn't really match up. So and I'm sorry, I know it's a little bit of a rant, but it's definitely been part of the narrative for going into this fight. And if nothing, I mean, I don't know how you can't look at both fighters. You can't really point to one or the other, in my opinion. So what does that mean? Does that mean we just go, fuck it? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you actually even approach the conversation. What do you think?
Like the way you just said it, man, you got to look at it both sides of the spectrum. Alvarez did get popped, but he hasn't been popped for anything since then. People have seemed to buy that excuse about the tainted meat because other fighters have claimed that's happened, and now it seems that it could be something, that actually was an issue out there. But like you mentioned, all the stuff that's gone down with Conti in the past, and then the shadiness that goes on with his company, which is there's a major dark cloud over him, regardless of how much you think he's reformed and changed and done all this other shit. There's still a big cloud on him. There's still a lot of questions about him. And he's not an expert the way people try to make him to be like that. Like he didn't go to, he didn't go to college for this stuff. He didn't go to a lab. Like he's not, he's not a licensed doctor who knows who knows what goes into all these type of, these supplements, as you just said, right? So
it's like taking a murderer and bringing him in and being like, you're a forensic pathologist now.
Yeah, because the guy, or like those people that, hack phones all the time and do stuff, and then they bring them in and hire them for, and part of their company, I don't know, man. Like, I never got too in depth with the whole steroids issues that others have, or who claim to be experts on it, or whatever it may be. A lot of people got really, really, really into it, but Conti is definitely one of those guys that, like, you got to take everything he says, I mean, with a grain of salt. Obviously, he's trying to put this out there, this facade and all this stuff about where he's at now and how he's changed, and he wants to do the best for fighters and all this other stuff. But his past is still his past. And everybody that's associated with him now and his company knows what he's done and knows what he's about and knows how the game is still played today needs to be suspicious of that. And not just kind of like wave it off and just kind of be like, well, if he says he's okay now, then I'm just going to say he's okay. If that makes sense.
It does. I have my own biases here in the whole Conti situation, but I think that what you say is really reasonable, dude. It's there's reason to be suspicion given his background, and so that itself kind of makes it funky. And like I asked earlier, does it kind of like cancel each other out? Like, no, it doesn't cancel each other out. It's just that I'm not entirely sure what the solution to this is. So
if a guy, anyone that's associated with Conti and everybody like that, even if it's not quite the same, situation or whatever it may be, you can't just come out there and blatantly say something without getting a finger pointed back at you and having some questions raised at you. Because
Yeah, dude.
that needs to happen. You know what I mean? You can't just sit there and be like, well, I'm Teflon right now and no one can say anything to me and I'm this and that, blah, blah, blah. Well, look who you're associated with. At least that now some questions have to be raised about that.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I don't, again, don't want to just bring it down into the muck, but it's kind of a similar situation to what we've seen. Like we just saw Raleigh Romero get yanked from his fight against Tank Davis. The news went out a little earlier that happened,
And
and
good for them. Good for them, man. I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't sure if that was going to happen, considering that the sport they were in. But I'm,
yeah, and
really glad that
it's definitely, it's a good thing. It's a positive thing, and I don't want to taint a positive thing. It's simply just in the interest of fairness and speaking to the hypocrisy of the situation that, if we're looking at this on a level playing field, there perhaps should be questions asked about Tank Davis in this regard as well. But just again, flipping it back to Canelo and Plant, it seems to me that without a pretty clear solution on the PED situation and all that type of stuff, which there isn't, I don't really know how much time needs to be spent, like from either the fighters, the fans, or anything, whining about the PED shit, because it's not really like a legit argument. But so
no, at the end of the day, I'm just ready for the fight. I'm pretty positive
right.
both guys are going to end up not being testing negative for anything. Everything's going to end up fine. I just want to fight at this point in time. You know what I mean?
So what do you think is going to happen, dude? What's your take on this?
Plant's going to come out aggressively. I'm sure he's going to be trying to work the jab early. He's not really, even though he's a slick fighter, he's not really a mover so much like a Billy Joe Saunders type. So I think he's going to try to stay more in the pocket and see if he can just kind of outslick Alvarez there, which is going to be difficult for him. Alvarez, I think, is going to take a couple of rounds to adjust. He might drop a round or two while he's trying to, figure it out, which he's tended to do before in the past. But once he catches a beat on him and it makes adjustments from there, that's when things are going to get interesting. And as we brought up earlier in the show, talking about how Plant's really going to have to step it up and not be on cruise control in this fight because this is going to be the fight of his life, we're going to see how he's going to react to that. And either he's going to be able to step up and like really fight the fight of his life from there and end up, stay the part of the course with Alvarez and then bring it up even more so, or Alvarez stepping up as he's going to do is going to make, Plant start falling apart. So I think at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Alvarez by decision. I'm not sure how close it'll be. Like, I think, like I mentioned early on, it should be pretty interesting, kind of close and interesting. But gradually, Alvarez starts figuring it out as he does in most of his fights, starts breaking him down, beating him up, and then he wins by about 3 to 4 points.
Yeah, dude, I think that's pretty fair. I think that's pretty fair. Yeah. I don't really think that I've seen anything from Caleb Plant that would lead me to believe that he's like soft or not tough or anything like that. I think that he's fairly
a very,
tough.
very tough guy, and he grew up tough and all that. I mean, there's no doubt.
Yeah. I think that
Did you see that YouTube video of him actually? There's a video of him fighting in the hood years ago against the guy who pulled a knife out on him.
It's kind of blurry. Like, I'm not entirely sure that that's really him. Footage. Yeah, like I guess it's him. I don't know, but yes, I have seen that video.
I think it is because I hear people saying he's a national champion. He's a national champion in the video. I think I heard something like that. So I'm almost positive.
Yeah, like it sounds like it could be him. And I think somebody was saying the other day that he had claimed that it was him too. But regardless, yeah, I did see it. I don't really think that I've seen much, from him that makes me think that he's gonna dog out of it or or anything like that. I think that it's going to be more of a situation where Canelo is going to have to work for the win. He's not just going to be given the win unless something happens early or some freak knockout or something like that. It's possible. But also I think that one thing that a lot of the people who are backing Caleb Plant himself, his team perhaps also too, might be overlooking a little bit is I think that the assumption is that the hand speed is with Caleb Plant. The advantage is firmly in his favor. And, it might be. He probably is a little quicker. But I think they also shouldn't look past Canelo's hand speed. He's got pretty good hands, dude. And even if it's not so much a speed thing, he's gotten to the point.
On point, bro.
He's very snappy, dude. Very snappy with his shots, and that can cut that speed advantage quite a bit. You know, like they I was even thinking about this earlier. Like I think that it's usually pretty true what they say. Like a boxer beats a puncher, right?
Mhm.
And like skills often beat power. I would say that's usually true. Like and like or speed beats power. Sorry. Speed beats power. And I would say that's usually true. However, timing often beats speed. And I would say that's also often true. And that's why
Absolutely.
why we've seen it, like even in the past, really good punchers with good timing who maybe weren't that fast. I think Felix Trinidad's like a really good example. Not that fast, not super fast hands, but really knew how to place his punches and had really good timing. Like he knew exactly when you were about to throw that hook, and that's when he was throwing his hook. As soon as you were setting up your hook, bitch, you better get out of the way because that hook was coming right at you. And if you weren't ready, and that's the kind of thing where I think that Canelo Alvarez is just really good at timing and snapping his punches so that that cuts
Oh
that
my God,
speed
man.
advantage
He
quite a bit.
might be the best in the sport at just proper timing and knowing the perfect placement. Like he doesn't, like you mentioned, he doesn't throw multiple flurry combinations. He doesn't have to. Like every punch counts. All right. You know, he doesn't waste any energy. He knows what he's doing in the ring. So I mean, he produces low numbers when it comes to the overall punch output. But at the same time, look at the connectivity rate. You know what I mean? Like the dude is up there.
Damn,
And
I should have even asked you before we did the show about the CompuBox numbers, but I didn't even think of it.
yeah,
But
I have to bring them up. I don't have them like
I
right
I
up
would
now,
I
but
would have to assume that in recent years Canelo's punch numbers
dude,
have gone up a little bit.
his accuracy is incredible.
Well,
And
and I
again,
think
it's
his
all about once he
outputs
catches a beat on you.
I think his output has gone up since moving up from middleweight, but I could be wrong. But regardless, it's still not very high. He's still
He's
definitely
never
not.
been, even when he was really young. I mean, he threw more punches back then, but even when he was like, again, when he first came on the scene, and the first time we were like seeing him, you know, on a national audience, he was still economical and not a guy who like went out there and just threw a bandit to the wind and really flurried like that. If he got a guy hurt, he'd finish you. He's a tremendous finisher, but he just again, it's all his punch placement. He knows where every punch is going. He knows where to land him. He knows what he's trying to do in there, and he's always thinking. Everything is a thought process with him. You see his mind always computing. You know, it's beautiful to
Totally.
watch. To see each round, to see how he like, you know, he figures something out each round and goes from there, and then soon enough, and once he kind of figures it out and knows he can start landing those bombs, that's when one of those, like you mentioned, them quick snap punches, like the uppercuts, for example. That's the best example. Them uppercuts that he lands when he just aims it and then he kind of throws that jab out there to get people distracted and boom. And when he hits it, that's when shit usually breaks or gets knocked out or head snap or whatever it may be. So that's when damage gets done. And at some point, Plant's gonna get hit with an uppercut. He's gonna get hit with some body shots, and um, laying on the ropes trying to pull the Mayweather and trying to do the shoulder roll and stuff like that when it's not Floyd is not gonna work. And that's the parts when Alvarez is gonna really shine because that's when the big blows are gonna be landed. So
Yeah, dude, I agree. I don't know what my official pick is going to be, but I would have to roll with Alvarez. It's nothing personal or anything like that. I'm not really a Caleb Plant fan, but actually something you said earlier too. I, there seems to be, for whatever reason, a little bit of a narrative that like Caleb Plant is like he's capable of or doing something that we never see fighters do this. I don't think that's true at all. I think that he's a good fighter, but I don't think that I've ever really seen anything from him that I'm like, wow, you just don't see that these days. Not
you know,
really. He's
I'm not saying that I'm looking because all of his challengers have been so overmatched that he needs to pull a like a super middleweight Roy Jones and blast him out there in a round or two. He doesn't. But he, you know, I just at the same time I still haven't seen anything that is just like wow to me. Like he's just going through, you know, he's not really pushed, so he doesn't really push himself, I guess, to really take it to that next level and really blast a guy out there and show these skills that people are saying he's going to be showing against Alvarez. He's very good. Don't get me wrong. Again, he's highly skilled. He's one of the better technicians out there, and I think he's a really solid fighter. But I'm not sure again that like unless I'm missing something here, he's going to really have to take it to another level to really compete there and you know not be in cruise control here.
No, I agree, dude. I think that this is not a situation where if Caleb Plant winds up winning, it's going to be a thing where a lot of people can point to precise moments in his career where it could say, "Yep, that's why." It's going to be more that he showed up more than what a lot of us expected.
And
So,
that could
and that's
totally
cool.
happen. That could totally happen.
It could, and I want it to be competitive. I don't want it to be some crap fight. But needless to say, Canelo Alvarez is at the top of his game, dude. He's easily one of the best couple fighters in the sport, if not the best right now. And there's not really much denying that. And that's also why I brought up the PED thing, because that seems to be one of the biggest knocks against him, or one of the biggest arguments for not making him one of the top one or two fighters in the sport right now. That seems to be the biggest thing, you know?
Absolutely. It makes you wonder too, since he got popped. Um, Even though it got kind of scratched away, are people going to hold that same standard that they do for others when the time comes for them to go into the Hall of Fame?
Well, I know how I'm voting, dude. And speaking of which, we're going to be doing one of them Hall of Fame shows very soon, so we can reveal how we voted for our for our ballot this year. So, yesterday was the deadline, but before we get out of here and wrap up this preview, I was just going to at least mention the undercard that's happening for Alvarez Plant. I mean, like I said, I'm just
There's
going
an
to
undercard?
mention it. Like I said, I'm just going to mention it. We don't need to do a discussion. It's not something that it's not an undercard that really speaks to me. I'll put it that way. Whereas Elvis Rodriguez, the Dominican fighter, against Juan Pablo Romero, who is undefeated but fairly inexperienced. Reyes Vargas, the freakishly tall bantamweight cat, who's
Ray Vargas, yeah.
yeah, he's fighting Leonardo Baez, who's a decent fighter, but I think that also a little bit of the excitement has gone out, or a little bit of the novelty is worn off for Reyes Vargas, who's a good fighter, but not nearly the kind of freakish Tommy Hearns type of fighter that a lot of
Yeah,
people want him to be based on his
definitely.
stature. He's definitely more of a kind of a distance type of fighter, but he's also
Yeah.
takes a bit of punishment too. So I'm not entirely sure how much longer, you know, he's going to be a thing. But he's also fighting on the undercard. But then the really unfortunate thing, and I'm sorry to say this, and I'm sorry to do this because I just have a massive bias, but Anthony Durrell's fighting some cat, and I don't like the Durrells, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Get him, Unk. Nice job. Whatever that was. Nice job, Unk.
Oh no. Oh,
Yeah.
Clarissa,
I don't know.
get her off social media. Yeah, no, it was a
No,
bad
I mean
moment.
it was, yeah, the Durrells have definitely had their share of controversy over the years. I'll just say that.
Between the controversies and the weird stuff, because it's not just there's been
Just
like
the
some
weird
weird
shit that happens in the fight.
Dr. Shaw high. Remember Dr. Shaw?
Oh, Gary.
Well, no, because after Andre Durrell got the punch while he was on the canvas from Arthur Abraham, and then they pulled him out of the Super Six, claiming that he had like a brain bleed or some neurological
That's right.
something.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then they were like, "Oh, where did you hear this from?" And they were like, "Oh, my doctor." They're like, "Do you have a name for your doctor?" And he said, "Yeah, Dr. Shaw High." And they were like, "That sounds made up as fuck, bro." And they never produced anything about it. It was like, wait, what? And it was when Gary Shaw was this fucking, yeah, well, Gary Shaw, bro. Anyway, so yeah, that just apart from the in-ring weirdness, out-ring weirdness, even apart from that, dude, it's, with all due respect to both of them, they're also not very exciting fighters. So
And
it
they're
doesn't
both
do much
washed,
for me.
man. Like Andre
Doesn't
Durrell
do much
has
for
been
me.
around for, dude. Andre Durrell's been around since about as long as I've lived in New York, which is a long ass time, maybe even before that.
I
Um,
remember when he was a prospect coming up.
and that was like in the mid 2000s,
Yeah.
right? Because he was out of what, the '04 Olympics, or yeah,
God, dude.
it was no, or
It's been a long time. We're old. But yeah,
I
so
want to
when
say it
I
was the
see the name,
2004 Olympics. So yeah, he's been around since then, dude, and he just never. I don't know. It just never really came about. You know, his first fight that he had with that no, not for like his fight that he had with Froch, which a lot of people thought that he was gonna like, you know, explode in that one. Then he ends up losing it. The weirdness, like you mentioned, what happened in Abraham, a fight that he was winning going away, but all the aftermath of that craziness. And his career just never really recovered after that.
Yeah, dude. Well, it's his brother fighting on the undercard,
I
but
know
even
that. Yeah. His brother's a complete mess. Like same thing. Even though
but
he
yeah, there's
became
not
champion.
much. It's kind of splitting hairs here. It's so yeah. When I see the name Darrell on like a pay per view card, I'm kind of like, e. So unfortunately, it's kind of a situation where this Showtime pay per view is you're definitely buying it for the main event. You're not really doing much for the undercard, but
Yeah, this is a really bad undercard. Really
that's
bad.
the same kind of situation we find ourselves in with just about every pay per view, to be honest.
And how much are they offering for this one? About 75 again or something?
And I'd have to look, but usually it's something like 75 and then 85 for HD or some shit, which is the dumbest shit, but whatever.
You're
Everybody
really
watches
just
it in
paying for the
HD.
main event for this card because the rest of the show would be like Fox on FS1 or something like that.
Yeah, it's not. It's okay. That's all. So the main event's pretty good though, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. I'm not super excited for it, but I'd say it's a fight week. It feels like a fight week.
No, it's a big fight. It's making history. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of bad blood around here. There's a lot of intangibles in this fight. There's a lot of diversity between the two sides of the fans and stuff like that, and how they feel and everything. So yeah, man, this is a good. As the week goes on, it's gonna get the anticipation and atmosphere is gonna get a lot better until Saturday hits, and then Twitter's gonna go nuts. Especially if Caleb Plant somehow wins.
Oh man, it's gonna get ugly if that
Caleb
happens.
Plant wins, bro. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's gonna get real ugly or real beautiful. Who knows? But also another actually really notable thing about this, and somebody feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this is the first open card in Las Vegas for a while where they're like opening it up, like it's
Mhm.
normal, I think, because I know the weigh-in's open. They're doing a totally open weigh-in to the public. They haven't done that for like a year and a half, and I'm pretty sure that that's the you just go. So in
No
any case,
mask, anything?
what's that?
No masks or anything.
I don't know, but that's not like they enforce that shit anyway. We've been watching
Yeah.
cards this whole pandemic. Nobody's doing shit, bro. No, so I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure that there's something significant in that regard. So I hope everybody has fun. I hope everybody goes and stays safe, has fun, and everybody has fun watching it. But look, dude, I look forward to it. Should be pretty good.
I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be awesome, man.
But
Whenever there's a big fight, it's gonna have a nice stretch too into November, which we have a bunch of big fights coming up and very, very good fights too. So
that's true, actually. We'll just kind of do a quick little rundown since we're here and I opened it up. Why not? Like this weekend, there's a couple other fights, but there's nothing, all that big. However, the following weekend, we got David Benavidez. Uzcategui got pulled from that card, but it sounds like they're going to replace him with Carlin Davis. Jaime Munguia versus Gabe Rosado. I think normally I would be kind of like, whatever about that fight, but Gabe Rosado getting that fucking
yeah,
massive,
man,
and
he had quite a little resurrection going on with his career. First, he got jobbed against Jacobs, and now that. So that's gonna be a good fight.
oh man, yeah, no,
He's definitely
that was
motivated
really
for it
bad.
too. He's definitely motivated. He's at the highest he's feeling in his career, I'm sure. So it's a good fight.
That was really bad against Jacobs for sure. And so then for him to follow it up, I literally like 30 seconds before he scored that knockout, I was like, he ain't knocking him out, so I guess he's gonna be blah blah blah. Boom, and I was like, oh shit. Great job
good.
tweeting that, you dick. That was me the dick. But
if his
but
face holds up, holds up, that's gonna be if his face can hold up, that's gonna be a hell of a fight.
Exactly. And you know what, dude? It ain't like Jaime Munguia. I think that I'm not going to say we got sold a bill of goods. I just think that he's not quite what a lot of people expected. So the win is potentially there for Rosado for sure. And we got some other shit coming up. What else? We got Boo Boo. Boo Boo's fighting Quigley on DAZN November 9th. No, I'm just kidding. Nobody's excited about that. Sorry, Boo Boo. Oh, that's right. Bud versus Porter.
He was yelling yeah.
That guy. No, but dude, we got Terrence Crawford, Sean Porter, Teofimo Lopez,
can't
George
wait for that fight.
Cambosos. That's kind of just like, let's just get that out of the way at this point. I
I
don't
mean,
know.
finally, right? Just thank God it's finally actually happening after all this craziness.
Yeah,
All this
I don't know that
stuff
anybody's even really anticipating
it's
it.
finally
That
going
just
down.
needs to get out of the way. But yeah, so there's at least an eventful November. So we got some shit coming up, dude. It's cool. I can dig it.
I'm hyped.
Very hyped. So anyway, bro, anybody who listened in, we always appreciate it. We really always appreciate it. And until the next show, if you are on social media, like Twitter, for instance, follow my boy Aris Pina at Punch Zone Aris. Follow me, Patrick Connor, at Patrick M. Connor. You can also follow Knuckles and Gloves on Instagram, Knuckles and Gloves, all one word, of course. And if you are on Facebook, you can find the Knuckles and Gloves podcast there. But if you're watching, subscribe on YouTube. Why don't you? Appreciate that. And if you're listening, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all of those good things. Those are always appreciated. Reviews appreciated. And Aris, thanks for allowing me to just talk breathlessly for minutes at a time. I appreciate it, bro.
Always, my man. Always come with the knowledge. So I appreciate it yourself.
For sure. All right, everybody, take it easy.
Later.